What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and we are back with Iron Fist because you guys loved the last video that we did. And this is the war or the tournament of the 7 capital cities of heaven, depending on how you want to look at it. And it's amazing. So this picks up with Danny Rand and Kunlun, because as we mentioned at the end of the last video, he was brought back to Kunlun because he was told that the tournament was beginning to take place. But Danny Rand had never heard of the tournament. He didn't know that any of this has gone on. And so what ends up going on here is that while Danny is reading the Book of the Iron Fist, which essentially has all this history about all the various Iron Fists that have existed in Marvel Comics that he knew nothing about, he's summoned by UT and brought to UT directly. Now, for those of you guys a little unfamiliar with this, Lei Kun the Thunderer is basically the trainer of Iron Fists within the city of Kunlun, but UT is basically the guy that oversees everything, right? It's leader, essentially. And so the whole explanation is given here to Danny Rand, where he's told Kunlun is one of 7 capital cities of heaven, each appearing on the mortal plane according to timetables charted amongst the stars. But once every 88 years, these appearances align in the heavenly convergence, and we celebrate this with a mighty tournament. Sections of each city join together, creating the heart of heaven, a palace where our contests take place. Aspects of each city, as well as of Earth itself, will be found here. It is unlike anywhere you have ever been, with rules and laws only unto itself. In each city resides an immortal weapon like yourself, with their own icon and fighting style, each as unique as you, Iron Fist. During the last convergence, your predecessor, Orson Randall, refused to fight. For this dishonor, he was to be stripped of his gifts. He resisted, and another city's champion was killed. He then fled, and the celebration ended in disgrace for us all. That will not come to pass this time. Do you have any other questions? And Danny's like, yeah. Why did my father become the Iron Fist? Now, this is kind of a side story for everything that was going on. And while this story will cover it, the reality here is it kind of distracts from the main event that's going on, not necessarily in a bad way, but it's not really the reason you came here. So if you guys are interested, we can make another video on it. But the long and short of it is that Danny Rand's father was in line to be an Iron Fist. Wendell Rand was supposed to be that guy. What ended up happening is that he basically chickened out. He kind of gave up at the moment that he was supposed to face Shu Lao. Now, it's a lot more, complicated than that. It's not like he's a coward where he was just terrified, like an old woman clutching his pearls or anything like that. He simply chose not to do it, and instead went back to the world of mortal men, where ultimately he met Danny Rand's mom, and then of course they had Danny Rand, and then Wendell tried to come back to Kunlun, hence the origin of Danny. But let me know if you guys are interested in seeing that, right? We can make a whole other video on it if you really, really are. But as the convergence begins to take place, they're kind of taken to a separate section of the city, at least Danny Rand is. And it's kind of fascinating the way that it's explained to him, right? He's told it's one city made of many cities, a place that is everywhere and nowhere at the same time. Flitting across Earth, we fight for honor and glory. We fight for Kunlun and for the right to our place on the earthly realm. For you see, Earth is the prize. And Danny asks, what in the world does this mean? And the response of UT is it's precisely what it sounds like, Danny Rand. The battles here decide the order of the cities of heaven in the celestial clockwork. Failure will lock us away from your world for half a century, not a decade. These are the stakes. Now, the reason why he says half a century and not a decade is because Kunlun is only accessible once every 10 years. But again, as it's being established here, if they lose, Kunlun will not be accessible once every 10 years. It'll be accessible once every half century. And that's assuming that they don't win the next tournament when the whole alignment takes place. So again, the nature of Kunlun as well, kind of being a dimensional location, is that like so many other dimensions, it is accessible regardless of the circumstances. If you're someone like Doctor Strange or somebody like that, you just make a portal, you walk in there, what's up UT, and then you leave, right? But when you're someone like Danny Rand or any regular mortal on Earth, you just kind of stumble across it, right? And that's basically it, which is exactly what happened to Danny Rand's granddad, right? But the fact is, like, once they actually get into this tournament themselves, we're introduced to the other fighters here. And I'll tell you guys right now, man, the Prince of Orphans, son. Dude, that guy is next level. Dude, it's nuts. Dude, it's absolutely, dude, man. I'm sorry, I'm so excited, people. Y'all will see what I'm talking about when we get to the tournament, man. It's bananas, right? So, like, Fat Cobra, right? His size and strength are only outclassed by his speed. The bride of 9 spiders, who's so dope. Her heart pumps the coldest blood imaginable and horrors inconceivable to mortal men. Dog brother number 1, hero to all the strays on all the streets of the world. A prankster assassin who rules the Undercity. Tiger's beautiful daughter. Many a man has found her doom at her hand or in her bed. And it sucks what happens to her, man. Right? And then, of course, the Prince of Orphans, mysterious even to we who cultivate unending mystery, and the new weapon of Kunzi, Davos, the steel serpent, master of the cranes. Now, of course, at that point, Danny Rand initially goes to like attack Davos, right? Because they have a very, very lengthy history together. And one of the things that's established in that story with like Orson Randall and Wendell Rand and all that kind of stuff is that Davos's history with Danny is only the most recent history that he has with Danny's family. In fact, he's been feuding with his father and even Orson long before all of this even happened, before Danny was ever even dreamed of by his father, right? But at the end of the day, one of the things that had happened in the previous video was that Davos had seemingly been working alongside a guy named Zhao in order to try to take over Rand Industries and so on and so forth. He and Danny Rand fought, and the plot will basically become clearer as time goes on because Davos, Zhao, Crane Mother, they're all kind of involved together. Now, the reason why Davos is the fighter for Crane Mother and her city is because her Iron Fist, or her immortal weapon rather, was killed in the previous tournament. And so because of that, and because it was done unfairly, she's kind of been without a champion for any real measure of time. But again, she ties into the plot because throughout all of this, she's seeking revenge. But no spoilers, we'll cross that bridge when we get to it, which is dope. Now, of course, at that point, Danny's just like, where's Jaren, right? Because Jaren is his friend who was kidnapped and all that kind of cool stuff. But the biggest thing here is that where Danny's going to attack Davos, he's told conflict between immortal weapons before the tournament is forbidden. Can you not control your warrior, UT? You bring dishonor to us all. And that's one of the most important aspects of this entire tournament. And it's a lesson Davos is gonna learn in spectacular fashion. Man, it's gonna be so amazing. There's rules here, but more so than the rules, there's the honor that comes in following those rules. And if you break those rules, you bring dishonor to yourself. And there is a price to be paid for that. And that price is dished out in no uncertain terms. So here's the thing. As it's stated here, in the nature of this tournament, we have set aside all of our blood feuds for this night. And Crane Mother says, allow me to cast the holy tiles to see which champion shall entertain us as we begin the first night's feast. And that person is Fat Cobra, kind of an opening display of his abilities. But it's not just for show. And Danny's told, watch this guy, right? Focus on how he fights and what he does. Because sure, he's not fighting anybody that could reasonably challenge him, but at the end of the day, he's still using the same strategies that he will be using in the tournament. He'll just be fighting harder when he does that. And so Danny is watching it all so closely. And it's one of the coolest things about Danny as an Iron Fist, right? When it comes to his character in Marvel, 9 times out of 10, he's kind of presented as a little bit of a goof. But when it comes down to it, Danny's a guy you want in your corner because that guy really focuses in and he really hones in on what's going on. But what ends up happening here is that when Fat Cobra is facing off against all these different individuals, Danny kind of comments here and he says, the Thunderer is right. The more I study Fat Cobra, the more perplexing he becomes. He's big, his totem is the tortoise, so that makes sense, but he's strong like an ox and he's not slow at all. I have no idea how to fight him, let alone beat him. And so once that display is done, Crane Mother pops back up again and says, as the last of the terror priests fall, heaven's heart becomes whole again, and so begins the tournament of our fates. Breathtaking work, Fat Cobra, and now, as a thank you for your fine sportsmanship and skills, you are allowed to choose who your first opponent will be. And the response of Cobra, it is my honor, most venerated spider mistress, since his blood is so clearly hot and eager for combat, allow me to choose the Immortal Iron Fist. So Danny's the first guy up here, right? And this is when things get really wild, because what ends up happening in the midst of all this is Danny is studying these ancient texts of the Iron Fist and so on and so forth. He's met by the arrival of a blue-eyed servant girl. Now, he saw this girl before, and she served him tea when he was watching the display with Fat Cobra. So it's the fact that she has blue eyes, which is not something that you see, right, when it comes to a place like Kunlun. So right off the bat, Danny knows that she's an outsider, right, very similar to what he is, and that they kind of have a bit of a sparring session where I wouldn't say she overcomes him, but enough where she shows that she's a very prodigious fighter. Now, of course, Danny Rand seemingly gets the upper hand momentarily, but then he doesn't, and then he gets kicked in the face. And so he's like, okay, so like, what's the deal? Right, you kind of caught me off guard. What's going on here? And what she says to him is kind of interesting. She says, there are larger things at work and missing pieces to what troubles you. And I've been sent to tell you where the answers lie. All you must do to find them is lose your upcoming match. And Danny's like, what? Like, you want me to throw the fight? And she's like, you must leave the heart of heaven and journey to the world of men. You will not be missed if you've lost and aren't going to fight again until the battle royale. You must let Fat Cobra defeat you. And so ultimately, Danny goes into the fight. And the whole time, he's just kind of wrestling with this, right? There's what he's trying to figure out with regards to Zhao and Orson Randall's history and the fact that Hydra is somehow involved in working with Zhao. Hydra's trying to take over Rand Industries to build some crazy massive train for some reason, and Danny doesn't really know why. There's all these little individual plot threads of what he's wrestling with at the moment. But somebody coming along with promises of how they can give you the answers of what you seek is almost too alluring for him. And so when the tournament begins, Danny puts up a pretty good fight, right? He really holds his own against Fat Cobra. And Fat Cobra uses some pretty dope moves, right? The Cudgel of Misfortune, Whirlwind of Impending Doom. But the whole time, there's no real grudges here, right? Fat Cobra says, excellent speed, my most venerated opponent, but already my explosive strategist mind compensates for such reflexes. You need to get out of your head, my friend, because even Danny recognizes he's stuck in his own head. But this is where the tournament gets wild, because Danny is hit by an attack and sent flying out of one of the windows. And that's when you realize that because of the kind of convergence of these capital cities of heaven, it blurs the barriers between these dimensional planes and Earth. So you can travel back and forth fairly easily depending on the circumstances. And the circumstance here within the tournament is that you can be knocked out into the streets of the world around you. And that's exactly what happens. When he flies through the window, he ends up in basically Hong Kong, and the fight between the two of them continues on. And it's a pretty knockdown, drag-out fight between these guys. People are watching the whole thing go on, so it's not like they're fighting invisibly, right, that nobody can see them. But like, people see this whole thing happening, and Danny is putting up one heck of an effort. But at the end of the day, he just doesn't really seem to have the skill set to overcome Fat Cobra. And Fat Cobra just starts pummeling him. And it's just like, yield. Say you yield. And ultimately, Danny's like, I yield, right? I give up. But do not let that trick you. Because at the end of the day, Danny threw the fight. That's exactly what happened here. He literally threw the fight, but for relatively good reason, because he comes back and he meditates. And the assumption of most everybody else around him is that he's meditating and just kind of licking his wounds right after this defeat. So most people aren't really going to ask any questions about where he goes to. And what ends up happening is he's actually brought down under Kunlun and shown a kind of portal, this device that allows a person who enters to travel into the world of men. This is a big no-no because in essence, it's a back door and it's not supposed to work that way. In fact, it's deceit of the highest order among all the other capital cities. Because what it would basically mean is that even if Kunlun loses the tournament, they can still access Earth, right? They can still travel back and forth as they need to, or at least that seems to be the case. And so this girl tells Danny, you need to go out there and you need to find basically the biographer, right, of Orson Randall. You need to find a guy by the name of Ernst Erskine. Now, just as a bit of a refresher here, right, the kind of relationship between Orson Randall and Danny Rand and all that kind of stuff goes back to Orson Randall's father basically crashing a ship into Kunlun because he happened to stumble across it while he was, flying through the air in his flying contraption. His wife was in the midst of getting ready to give birth. And it just happened to be when Kunlun was on Earth during this 10-year period. So Phineas Randall crashes into it. Orson Randall's born in Kunlun. And then Orson Randall goes on to become the Iron Fist, being trained in the city of Kunlun itself. Eventually, he abandons the whole thing when he realized the nature of the tournament of the 7 capital cities of heaven, that he would have to fight on behalf of Kunlun, and that fight could potentially result in a death. And in fact, it did when he felt like he was being attacked by Crane Mother's immortal weapon, and he killed her immortal weapon, hence the reason why she'd allied herself with Davos in this tournament. But when it came to the Rand family line, it branches off when Orson Randall came across Wendell Rand. Wendell Rand was a child at the time and was unofficially adopted by Orson Randall. He just kind of took him to raise. But Orson Randall would tell stories about Kunlun and about the Iron Fist. And Wendell wanted to become one. And Orson tried to talk him out of it, but Wendell ultimately went out and sought Kunlun on his own and was supposed to become the Iron Fist. Again, we'll kind of talk about all that in that video if you guys are interested in seeing it, but it's pretty fascinating, right? The big revelation that kind of came out of this conversation between Danny and that girl is that that girl is actually the daughter of Orson Randall, which is really, really fascinating here. Now, when it comes to this kind of biography of Orson Randall, it's not nearly as interesting as you might think. And the artwork is kind of cool, but it was more of a showcase comic where Marvel showcased the art styles of various people. It just kind of shows the things that Wendell did. And again, we can kind of roll that into the Wendell Rand video if you guys are interested in that. But in terms of Orson Randall, one of the big revelations to come out of it is that he had inherited a fortune from his father, and no one really knew where that fortune came from until he was spending time with Ernst, hence the guy who was writing the biography of Orson. And that while they had gone on a whole host of adventures together, and Orson had saved his life more times than Ernst could count, that Orson had shown him a coin that was minted in Kunlun. So the indication was that Orson's fortune came from Kunlun itself. But again, we're going to kind of go through this little bit of a puzzle, and it's going to become really interesting really fast. But at that point, you do kind of switch back to a bit of the tournament itself. Now, of course, Danny Rand is absent here, and so you see the tournament unfold from the perspective of Lei Kung the Thunderer. And the next fight we get to see here is Dog Brother number 1 against the Bride of 9 Spiders. Now, this is cool because as soon as all this goes down, she immediately opens her corset and all these spiders come pouring out and try to attack Dog Brother. Now, the thing about this is that when it comes to the Bride of 9 Spiders, she seems to largely be a distance fighter. And so when Lei Kung is watching all of this, right, intending to report back to Danny, or at least inform Danny of everything he saw and the significance of the fighting style of whoever it is that wins, he really kind of commends, right, Dog Brother for actually charging directly at the Bride of 9 Spiders, because as a distance fighter, the best way to engage her is to engage her directly. The problem is that no one really seems to know exactly how the fight unfolds because, again, much like the fight between Danny Rand and Fat Cobra, they end up leaving the immediate tournament grounds and just kind of end up in a jungle somewhere. And so the victor of the fight is determined when Dog Brother number 1's wolves basically begin to howl. And it's really a howl of sadness, and it's a howl of loss. And so it's kind of like, okay, cool. So Bride of 9 Spiders won. And so that ends the tournament for the day, when the next day's fight will actually see a conflict between Davos and Tiger's beautiful daughter. Now, for Danny Rand himself, once he leaves Ernst and he just kind of tries to make his way back to Kunlun, there is again a little bit of a side story where Zhao, the guy who was working with Hydra to build trains, is still doing that at the moment because he had kidnapped Jaren, and because Danny Rand had reached out to Luke Cage before his departure for the tournament and said, hey man, can you and the Heroes for Hire try to find Jaren? They're out there doing all of that, right? So that whole plot thread will come back here in a little while, but again, we'll talk about that once we get towards the end of the story when that plot thread becomes relevant here. But going into the aftermath of the tournament, while Danny's slowly making his way back to Kunlun, trying to sneak in with no one knowing that he left. You do get a kind of back and forth among the various warriors where it's more camaraderie than anything else, right? Nobody really hates each other. There's not a lot of anger there or anything along those lines. And it's really just kind of like, hey, like you fought well, I beat you, but like you fought well, right? That sort of thing. And so that's when you pick up with the fight for the next day, Davos versus Tiger's beautiful daughter. Now, here's the crazy thing about this. Davos is eager to prove himself. And when he was there in Kunlun, he was known as Davos. But now that he has allegiance to Crane Mother, he's changed his name to Steel Phoenix. But here's the issue. Davos, almost throughout his entire existence, and even on Kunlun, when he was there as the son of Lei Kung the Thunderer, was largely a man without honor. And when I say without honor, I simply mean that he doesn't really care about the rules. He'll do whatever it takes to win. And in this particular instance, he actually ends up going too far, because one of the things that happens is that with Dany still gone, there is a little bit of taunting back and forth between the two, right? Where Tiger's beautiful daughter is like, where are your harlots, little bird? Where on earth will you summon your power? And the response of Davos here is like, I'll dig deep, harlot. If you're lucky, maybe I'll show you how deep. And again, they just kind of go back and forth. But again, Davos gets the upper hand on her quite readily. It's not to say that she's just some weakling. And in fact, she actually cuts his hand off at one point. So like, she does some damage here, right? She really inflicts some hardcore damage on this guy. But even not having a hand, he summons up his power long enough to kind of fabricate a fake hand to a degree, and then uppercuts her. Now, that should have been the end of the tournament right there. But instead, he keeps pummeling her, right? Like he keeps fighting her and like just keeps beating the crap out of this girl. And in fact, Lei Kung is just like, this isn't even combat. Like this is murder. Now, of course, he doesn't literally kill her, but he's beating the absolute tar out of her, because even when she goes and steps up to say like, I yield, he's like, don't you dare say it, right? And just keeps on going. And so once he's done and once he stops, like Lei Kung is the one that kind of brings him back to sanity momentarily. Davos kind of lost himself in the conflict. He betrayed the rules of the tournament. But for Davos, it's more prideful and kind of being able to say like, look, Dad, I told you what I was capable of and I told you that I was powerful, right? I want to hear you say it. I want to hear you say that I won, that I'm the champion. And that's exactly what Davos is kind of forced to do, right? He's forced to say like, you are the champion, you won this bout. And so after it's all said and done, Dany Rand finally reappears in Kunlun. And when this happens and he shows back up, he's actually taken by Lei Kung the Thunderer. And one of the things that Lei Kung says is that UT is corrupt. He's been corrupt for quite some time. And the Thunderer knows just how corrupt he is, because the fortune that we were talking about that Orson Randall inherited from his father, because his father was an inventor who crash landed in Kunlun and just happened to show up there, when UT, right, Nuon basically is his name, when he became the new leader of Kunlun, that Phineas was commissioned to make a machine even when Nuon was a younger kid, before he ever officially took over after his father's passing as the leader of Kunlun. And the machine is the one that Dany Rand entered into to take him into the world of mortal men. And so a huge sum of money was paid to Phineas for crafting that machine. And that's the money that Orson Randall inherited. But Thunderer just kind of looks around and says that UT has basically become a tyrant. He rules this place with an iron fist, but he has none of the honor that his father had. His loyalty is not to Kunlun and the people in it. His loyalty is to himself. And if it comes down to it, he would abandon the entire city. Now, one of the other cool things that comes out of this is that Lei Kung the Thunderer has actually been raising an army in secret by training the women of Kunlun. Because within Kunlun, women are not allowed to learn martial arts. They're not allowed to study martial arts in any real meaningful way. The only real exception to that was the daughter of Orson Randall. And even then, it was unofficial. And her task has largely just been to be a servant girl around there. So seemingly even UT doesn't necessarily know how capable she is. He knows she is capable, but he doesn't really have all the details per se. And so that's where the revelation is given to Dany, that in light of the fact that UT is so corrupt and is not fit to be a leader of Kunlun, Thunderer actually intends to overthrow him as the leader of Kunlun, and then have some new leader essentially take his place. And so Danny is made aware of this, right? To kind of put it on the back burner. You got a tournament to worry about, but a time's going to come when it's all going to come to a head. And that's when you get, right? That's when you get to the orphan, because things get dope. At that moment, he's supposed to fight Fat Cobra, right? The Prince of Orphans is supposed to move up in the ranks, fight Fat Cobra. He says, actually, wait, right? And they're kind of like, okay, like, what's your deal? Like, I mean, did I speak incorrectly? Have I offended you? And keep in mind here, Prince of Orphans is the only member of the Immortal Weapons that's fought in multiple tournaments before all of these guys. So he's been doing this for a long time. And he says, no, dog brother number one, you speak with the verve and brio of a natural-born speaker. But if it would please the assembled and my honored opponent, I would like to propose a rather unorthodox shifting of the fight sequencing. Seeing the last round of combat, seeing the fire and violence that were unleashed, made me eager to face it myself. I wish not to combat Fat Cobra, no offense to you, fine sir, but rather Davos. And Davos, ever arrogant and haughty, full of hubris, is like, I accept, right? And so he's just like, don't think that because you're some venerated elder that I will show you mercies that escaped Tiger's beautiful daughter. I fear old men even less than I fear painted horse. And his response is, shut up, right? And that's the crazy thing. Davos goes to throw a punch and the Prince of Orphans makes it his last one. This guy dominates Davos. He doesn't even get a punch in. Doesn't even get a punch in. The whole time he's like, man, son, you better come strong. Son. Dude, it's absolutely nuts. And the whole time, he's absolutely talking trash. He's like, this is a tournament, child, and men like ourselves are nothing without rules. And so like where Davos literally gets clocked and almost like collapses on his head, the Prince of Orphans is like, easy boy, I've got you. And he says, now listen, I'm going to teach you something about having a code. And no one understands exactly what it is that they're saying, but they're just flabbergasted. They're like, it's a sight to behold. And so without really finding out explicitly what he said, he just stands up and he's like, Davos yields. He's unconscious, so he can't say it himself, but he yields. He's done. And let that be a lesson to all of you. This is a tournament both ancient and honorable, with traditions and rules for all of its combatants. It is not a murder carnival. The tragic events of the last tournament seem to have clouded the purpose of the thing in your minds. If one more unnecessary drop of blood is spilled, you will all pay the price. We are warriors, not killers. And they all know it's true, right? They all know that if this guy decided to, he would kill them all. And so in the aftermath of all of this, of course, like kids at a lunch table, you know, talking to the new guy or wanting to get to know the new guy, they're like, okay, so like, let's invite him over to the table. Right, let's like hear this guy's story or find out what this guy's deal is. Danny Rand walks up to him and he's just like, away. And Danny's like, cool, man, not looking for a fight. Peace. And just like bails out. Right, he essentially just takes off. And so while Danny Rand is in his quarters and initially talking to the servant girl, he picks up pretty fast there's a lot more to her than she seemingly lets on. And in fact, he figures out pretty quickly that she's actually working more in line with Lei Kun the Thunderer than she let on. And in fact, it's really more her war, right? She's the one that kind of goaded Lei Kun the Thunderer into the idea, at least that seemed to be the case. And not because she seeks to seize control of Kunlun for herself, but more because she's just like, this guy's gotta go. Right? Like this guy is a terrible leader. And so it's a really cool concept because at that point, Danny's like, I will help you win your war, right? Like I will help you do this because I think you're fighting on the right side. And that's when the Prince of Orphans appears to him and says, look, I know who you are. I know what you're about. And I know what's going on here with the revolution. I want to join your side. I want to be a part of your cause. So now it's dope, right? Because now he's just got this ridiculously prodigious fighter. His name used to be Green Mist, but like it's nuts. He's got this insanely prodigious fighter on his side. And so that's when all these little moving pieces start to gather together incredibly fast because Danny goes to confront UT. He calls him out and he's like, I know what's going on with you. I know you've got a portal that allows you to enter into the world of men. I know that you're sneaking out, which is gravely against the traditions and the rules of Kunlun. And not even you are above the rules of Kunlun. So if you do not step down as the leader of this place, then I'll tell everybody what you're doing. And the response of UT here is, dude, I'll take my chances with the court of public opinion, right? Everybody here swears loyalty to me anyway. So who do you think they're going to believe? You, an outsider, or me, who comes from a royal line of leaders within this place? But Danny knew exactly what he was going to do, because the whole thing was a ruse between Danny, the girl, and Lei Kun. Because as soon as Danny leaves, UT assembles his terror priests, and it's just like, I have a mission for you guys. Go forth and destroy the Randall Gate, i.e., destroy the evidence of any wrongdoing. So when Danny makes his claim, I can just say, look, I don't know what he's talking about, man. Like, this guy's nuts. He's an outsider, right? We never should have let him in here in the first place. And that's the end of Danny. And so while he makes his move and the terror priests go running out, Danny's like, there they go, right? And Lei Kun and them were planning on that. While that's going on, the Prince of Orphans goes to see all the other immortal weapons and is like, I have a mission for you guys, right? If you guys are down, right, I have a proposal, because all you guys are hanging out with each other. You guys are all talking. There's obviously camaraderie here. Do you guys want to join a war? Because I'm about to fight one and I could really use your help. And then you switch over to Davos. Now, the fight between Davos and his father is pretty unique. And within the context of the Iron Fist mythos, it's been a long time coming, right? That the reality is Davos felt like he should have been the Iron Fist. And for a moment, he had the opportunity to be Iron Fist. In fact, he went to go face the dragon Shu Lao and was determined to be unworthy. But in his mind, it's not because he was unworthy, it's because Kunlun somehow poisoned the dragon against him. And every step of the way, when it comes to his life, he blames everybody else for everything going wrong. Well, it's never my fault if something bad happened to me. It's somebody else's fault. And if in some way it could be made into my fault, well, it was circumstances beyond my control, right? Like, this guy is never wrong about anything. He believes he has the upper hand on everything 100% of the time. And so even when his father is talking to him, right, Lei Kun the Thunder is like, this whole campaign with Zhao, you allying yourself with him, Zhao letting you use his forces in order to try to destroy Danny Rand, luring him to the tournament, or at least informing him that the tournament exists, and then us bringing him here and all that kind of stuff, you allying yourself with Crane Mother, none of it has anything to do with you. Crane Mother wants to destroy everybody and the 7 capital cities of heaven because she's pissy because her warrior got killed in the last tournament. Zhao has always wanted to destroy Kunlun, even long before you ever came along. These two individuals out there have long since had a common goal. They allied with themselves and they used you to pull it all off. But you're too foolish to look around and to realize that you're being played. And so even when his father tells him that, Davos seemingly refuses to believe it. He refuses to accept that reality. And his father just ultimately leaves. And he's like, look, I know that in your darkest heart, right, that you know Kunlun is home. You may not like it, you may hate it, but at the end of the day, Kunlun is your home, it's my home. So the question is, will you really stand idly by while some man invades this place and tries to destroy it from the outside, while a leader of one of the 7 capital cities of heaven tries to destroy it from the inside? And so that's where things get cool, right? Because Zhao had basically kidnapped the members of the Heroes for Hire, right? Luke Cage, Colleen Wing, so on and so forth, and brought them all here as prisoners, right? To just kind of show them what was going on. Plus, he didn't have time to send them back anywhere else. And so they're kind of watching everything unfold. But because the barrier of Kunlun is weakened during the tournament of the 7 capital cities of heaven, it provides an opening for Zhao's forces to invade. But that is when he's also told, you do realize this was all part of the plan, right? Like, he's even told that by like the Heroes for Hire, who Danny Rand had momentarily talked to, and was like, make sure the guy gets to Kunlun, right? I've got a plan, trust me, make sure he gets there, and make sure his invasion goes off without a hitch. Because when that happens, and this guy does get there, Danny Rand, realizing that Zhao has always been trying to destroy Kunlun, comes to this realization he's got to be stopped here and now. Otherwise, he will always come back at some point in time. So when Zhao shows up here to the weakened barrier, Danny Rand and all the immortal weapons are waiting for him. And let me tell you something, son, all this guy has at his disposal are like Hydra soldiers, right? These guys carry guns and stuff like that. Against immortal weapons, 7 of the deadliest fighters that exist across multiple dimensions in Marvel Comics. Yeah, man, this fight was over before it even started. And one of the craziest things about this, right? So like the train's barreling down the tracks, right? Like literally Zhao's just like full steam ahead, right? Like barrel that train through that barrier right there. I got enough explosives on this to make Hiroshima look like a firework. So like we're gonna blow this place to pieces. And Danny's like literally starts charging up the power of the Iron Fist. This train's coming, Danny's charging, and he's just like, all right, man, like it's sink or swim, right? You know, it's put up or shut up. He's like, let's see just how powerful the power of Shu Lao the Undying really is. So this train comes barreling, Danny punches this thing, punches this train as hard as he can, blows the thing to smithereens. And everybody initially believes that Danny Rand dies. And he's just like, nope, that doesn't happen. I'm Danny Rand, the Iron Fist, son. It's gonna take a whole lot more than that to kill me. So he like picks up with the other immortal weapons and they just sweep through these Hydra soldiers like a hurricane. It's absolute pandemonium. These guys never had a shot. And so at that point, Zhao's just like, okay, let's go to the Randall Gate, right? If that's the case, right? Go to the Randall Gate, we can enter in through the back door. And where one of his guys is like, that's suicide, man. Like, he's just like, it doesn't matter, right? We can still pull this off. One way or another, Kunlun is going to fall. Well, UT ends up bailing out, right? He ends up like trying to take off. And so Davos, sitting in his cell or whatever it is, just looks down at this and is just like, where's this guy going to, right? And kind of gets a little bit of a change of heart, right? So he starts following UT because UT's heading to the Randall Gate. And he even tells his terror priest, wait, do not destroy that thing. I need that thing to make my escape. And so when he initially starts to get down there, Davos gets the upper hand on him, only for Davos himself to realize the daughter of Orson Randall has actually taken out all of the terror priests alongside her soldiers, which is amazing. And she's just like, Nuwan, you're done, right? Like it's over, right? You're finished here, right? It's curtains, drapes. That's really it, right? And so like at that point, Hydra agents come pouring through the gate, right? And like all these Hydra agents start getting taken out. Davos allies with Kunlun, finally redeeming himself and taking out all these Hydra agents. And so at that point, Danny finally catches up to Zhao while all these Hydra agents are being completely and totally obliterated. And Zhao gives him these words, right? He tells him something that blows Danny Rand's mind. Danny tells him, like, you failed, there's no one left to avenge you. And what does Zhao say? There's an 8th city, Danny Rand, and jumps off the bridge, right? He just tells him, like, there's a city you didn't know about. There's another place out there you had no idea what it was. And then effectively jumps to his death. Right? And so following that, Davos repents to his father, right? And says, look, like, I am sorry. You know, Prey Mother has cut me off from her, chi source. I'm the Steel Phoenix. No longer. I was wrong for my actions. I seek to atone, right? Have mercy on me. And so he's actually taken to the temple of Shu Lao the Undying, who's basically kind of going through the rebirthing process, right? As a dragon. His egg will hatch at some point in time. When it hatches, nobody really knows. But Davos is just stationed here until such a time as that transpires. The tournament more or less seems to be over. Danny Rand ends up going back to the city of New York to kind of deal with everything going on with Rand Industries. And yeah, things are about to get very interesting, right? Because with the immortal weapons hanging out here with Danny, stuff gets cool. With that being said, guys, we're going to bring this video to an end. Let me know what you think down in the comments section. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.